Как Наполеон мобилизовал практически всю Европу против Российской империи, как Гитлер мобилизовал, захватил и поставил под ружье большинство европейских стран и бросил их против Советского Союза. Сейчас тоже Соединенные Штаты сформировали коалицию из практически всех европейцев, входящих в НАТО, да и не только входящих в НАТО, из членов Евросоюза тоже, и через Украину по доверенности ведут войну против нашей страны.
This is my first video update from downtown Nicosia, Cyprus, the old town of Nicosia, Cyprus, on this Thursday morning. Let's talk about some news. And the big story, the big breaking news is that Klaus Schwab's favorite daughter, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, she announced that she will step down as Prime Minister. She is resigning. A very unpopular, from what I understand, a very unpopular Prime Minister, realizing that her chances of staying in power, her chances to get reelected are slim to none. And she is now stepping down because she can't win, it seems. And she said, you know what, if I can't win, well, then there's no use in being in politics, I guess, is the way she's looking at it. I'm sure she'll get a nice cushy job in some globalist organization, some UN or IMF or World Bank or something like that. But she said that she's resigning from, and I'm paraphrasing here, she's going to step down as Prime Minister because it was just too much stress and too difficult, and it's just been too hard for her emotions and all of this stuff. I'm paraphrasing what she said. She gave a speech about it yesterday, and anyway, that's what she said are the reasons for her resigning. I think the reasons are more about the fact that she realizes she can't win, she can't stay in power, and so she's bolting.
And so today I'm announcing that I will not be seeking re-election, and that my term as Prime Minister will conclude no later than the 7th of February.
Interesting that this is taking place at a time when the WEF is having their little Davos event, because Ardern is Klaus Schwab's favorite daughter. If Trudeau is Klaus Schwab's favorite son, Ardern is Klaus Schwab's favorite WEF daughter. So that is the big news coming out of New Zealand. Can we say that this is part of the Zelensky curse? Maybe. Yeah, I think we could. Why not? We can say that this is another globalist leader who has fallen victim to the Zelensky curse, even though New Zealand may not have been as invested in Project Ukraine. It did support Project Ukraine, Ardern being part of the globalist cool kid clique. She did send, I believe she sent military commanders from New Zealand to train Ukraine military. I definitely know that New Zealand provided a lot of expertise in communications and surveillance and stuff like that. I don't know how much hardware New Zealand sent to the Ukraine military, if any, but she definitely involved New Zealand into the conflict in Ukraine, not to the extent of EU leaders, of course, but she was a supporter of it, and now she is gone. So that is the big news coming out of New Zealand. I am sure Klaus Schwab is very upset, though I am positive that they are preparing her next position right now as we speak in some globalist institution or think tank or something like that. Most likely that's what's going to happen. Anyway, who knows? Maybe she's just going to retire and just live a quiet, good life somewhere in New Zealand. Who knows? Anyway, let's talk about my opening video segment, which was Lavrov, and he was speaking at a press conference, a foreign ministry press conference. I think the press conference went on for something like 3 hours, or maybe even more, maybe 4 hours. But it was a huge press conference. Lavrov answered a lot of questions. He talked about Russia cooperating with Africa, with countries in Africa, with India, China, the Middle East. They're working on all kinds of trade deals outside of the US dollar. Bad news for the USD if you're a Bidenopolist, Greece's favorite son, because a lot of countries are working with Russia to de-dollarize as we speak. So he talked about Russia's cooperation with the rest of the world. He was asked about timelines for the conflict in Ukraine, and Lavrov said that the conflict in Ukraine will end when the NATO threat is eliminated in Ukraine. So he did say that. But I think his most interesting line was the video segment that I played in the beginning, where Lavrov said, and I quote, "Like Napoleon mobilized almost all of Europe against the Russian Empire, like Hitler invaded and gunned down most EU countries and threw them against the USSR, now too the US has formed a coalition of almost all Europeans and is waging a proxy war against our country." It's a fascinating statement from Lavrov. It's a warning to Europe and to the collective West. Don't go down the same path that Napoleon and HITLER went down, because we already know the results. And it is also a way to understand how the Russian government and how Russian society is viewing the conflict in Ukraine, in very much the same way as what happened with every empire, imperialist empire before NATO and the collective West, which wanted to get their hands on Russia and to dismember Russia and get a hold of Russia's resources. This is how this conflict is now being interpreted inside of Russia by the Kremlin, by the administration in the Kremlin, as a conflict, once again, between Russia and the collective West, Russia and NATO. And Lavrov is saying as much in this statement, which is, in my opinion, which is true. Ukraine is being used as a proxy, as a battering ram against Russia. We had pretty much that being admitted by Angela Merkel, by Hollande, by Poroshenko, when they said that the Minsk agreement was just a way to buy time, to build up Ukraine's military and buy time so that Ukraine could be used as a proxy in an eventual conflict with Russia, which would lead to some sort of regime change and some sort of dismemberment, breaking apart of the Russian Federation. Has anyone seen the video that is going around now of one of the Minsk meetings? I believe it was called the Normandy format, if I'm not mistaken. But this was one of the meetings where when Zelensky was president, when he first got into office, and it was between Putin, I think Macron, Merkel, and Zelensky. And Putin is once again trying to get Merkel and Macron and Zelensky to abide by the Minsk agreements. And so he's sitting there reading, a statement with regards to the meeting. And initially, all we had was the focus on Putin as he was reading the statement. But now, from what I understand, a Russian journalist released a video that he had shot when this press conference, when these statements were being read, and it shows Zelensky kind of laughing like a clown, the clown comedian that he was. Remember, back then he was new as he just arrived into office as the president of Ukraine, so he was fresh on the job. So I guess he still had a lot of that clownish comedian thing to him. So he was kind of like laughing and just kind of like mocking the entire process. And this Russian journalist filmed it and he published it. I think he published it a couple of days ago. I don't know if this is an old video that is now resurfaced that he published, or if he just found this footage now and he published it. But anyway, it's really funny because there you can see that Zelensky understood that the whole Minsk thing was a joke, and like the clown that he was and he is, he was making fun of it, while Putin was being serious because he understood the implications of not fulfilling the Minsk agreement. Zelensky was joking around and laughing and making goofy faces. It's a really interesting video. Maybe I'll put a link for it down in the description box down below as well, so you can see it for yourself. Putin was in St. Petersburg, and he was at commemoration, at an event for commemoration for the World War II siege of St. Petersburg, the blockade and the siege of St. Petersburg, which was something like 847 days, I believe, that St. Petersburg was blockaded and was sieged by the German army, and Putin was there to commemorate that event, and he also spoke to the press, and he said some interesting things. I think the most interesting thing that Putin said was that Russia launched this special military operation, according to Putin, so that they could protect the Russian speakers in Donbass and put an end to the 8-year-long war in Donbass. And it's interesting because Russia and the Kremlin, they view everything that's going on in Ukraine not from the context of a February 24th special military operation, but as just another part of what was an 8-9-year-old regime change, coup d'etat, and then conflict with Russia, whether it was in the 8 years of, whether it was in the initial civil war, the war between Poroshenko and the Donbass, whether it was the 8 years of constant shelling with Poroshenko, then with Zelensky of the people in Donbass, the constant Ukraine military shelling of the Donbass, or the Ukraine military buildup, or the eventual SMO. The Russians see this as going back to the Obama, EU, John McCain, Cookies Newland, Yatsenyuk coup d'etat of 2014, and maybe even beyond that. So I thought that was an interesting statement from the Russian president. Sticking with Ukraine, we have some news on the ground as to what's going on in the conflict in Ukraine, and that has to do now with the settlement of Siversk, which is, I want to say it's now in a cauldron, or it's about to become a cauldron. But Zelensky, the commander of the Ukraine military, he is now telling Zelensky that the Ukraine military needs to evacuate from Siversk. If they do not evacuate, then Zelensky is saying that his military will be cut off. They will be trapped in a cauldron. And this is bad news for the Ukraine military following Soledar. You now have Siversk. This is once again another part of this Bakhmut conglomeration of settlements and villages, which is falling to the Russians and which will eventually lead to the encirclement of Bakhmut and the cutoff of supplies to the Ukraine forces, which are fighting in Bakhmut, which Zelensky to this day continues to feed into Bakhmut. So Zelensky is telling Zelensky they need to get out of Siversk, and we will see if Zelensky follows Zelensky's advice and retreats from Siversk. It would be another media optics blow to the Zelensky regime and the collective West. So that is what is going on the ground, and of course this is leading to a general sense of panic from the collective West. And whenever they have panic about Ukraine, their one solution is more weapons and more money. They think that weapons and money is going to solve everything, instead of realizing that they are not going to win, and to decide to engage Russia in a diplomatic way, and to perhaps sit at the negotiations table and to figure this out. Their solution to this conflict and to the crumbling of Ukraine's defensive line in defensive positions in the Donbass is to pump Ukraine up with more weapons and more money. We had the WEF. We have the WEF forum taking place right now, where the whole goal of the forum is just to raise money for Ukraine. That's pretty much it. That's the whole goal of this WEF, all the clowns are gathered together, all the puppets are in Davos right now to raise more money for Ukraine. And of course, we have more weapons and more lethal weapons, weapons which are meant to strike at Crimea and to strike deep inside of Russia, which are being discussed and talked about by the collective West. Lloyd Austin landed in Germany for this big meeting between the collective West defense ministers, where they're going to make big announcements. The big announcements that they're going to make is longer range missiles and weapons and stuff like that to hit Russia. That's going to be the big announcement. And I'm pretty sure another big announcement, as Brian Berletic said in his video yesterday on the New Atlas, I agree with this. I think one of the other big announcements will be tanks, lots of tanks for Ukraine. Weapons solves everything for them in their mind. In their mind, the more weapons, the shinier, the bigger, the badder the weapons, that's going to solve all of their problems in Ukraine. And they always go through this cycle. Whenever Russia takes territory or wins a battle or does something in Ukraine on the battlefield that goes against their media narrative of Zelensky is winning and he's going to be marching on Moscow any day now, whenever you see something like this happen, they come out with a counter story of a counter narrative, which is, we're going to send more weapons. We're going to send HIMARS. We're going to send drones. We're going to now send missiles that can hit Crimea. We're going to send Leopards. That's the way that they distract from the battlefield losses that the Ukraine military is incurring. It reminds me of that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where Mr. Portokalis, whenever someone was suffering from something, he would just spray Windex on them. Windex solved everything. He was like, you got a cut on your hand, Windex. You have a cold, Windex, and he would just spray it on everybody. That's how he solved all of his problems with Windex. And this is exactly how the collective West is viewing Ukraine. Any problems that are going on in Ukraine, any problems, their solution is weapons. That's it. So we have this story from the New York Times. I'm walking back and forth. I'm sure some people are going to say, Alex, you're making me dizzy walking up and down. I'm almost trapped here in the old walls of Nicosia. I can go up the steps, though. I can go up the stairs and enter the new town. I will in a sec. I'll walk up the stairs and we'll take a walk through the old town. But we have this New York Times article, which is saying the U.S. warms to helping Ukraine target Crimea. The Biden administration is considering the argument that Kiev needs the power to strike at the Ukrainian peninsula annexed by Russia in 2014. So the article is saying that before, the Biden White House was not so hot on the idea of sending weapons that can hit deep inside of Russian territory or hit into Crimea. But because they feel like the whole nuclear threat is off the table, Russia using nukes is off the table, they're now saying, you know what? We can now send some weapons to hit Crimea and to cause damage deep inside of Russian territory. The thinking, according to the experts in DC, the think tank experts, is that these weapons, if given to the Ukraine military, and I'm positive that the Ukraine military, they're going to be the ones to operate these weapons, right? Right. If you believe that, I've got some Nicosia walls, old city walls to sell you. But the thinking is that Ukraine will be able to strike into Crimea, specifically Crimea. Remember, they have a Crimea fixation, but they want to hit into Crimea. And they say if they can hit Crimea and hit Crimea hard, according to the New York Times, then that would give Ukraine leverage as it negotiates for some sort of settlement. It's the same thinking that they've had throughout this conflict, which is the more damage we can do to Russia, maybe we can weaken Putin's position, maybe we can push along some sort of regime change or change in government in Russia, or get the wheels moving for some change in government in Russia, and that will give us leverage as well in negotiations, because their thinking is that Putin will feel so weakened by our strikes deep inside of Crimea that he'll just want to end the war, because his position in Russia as president will be in jeopardy. That's how they're viewing it. This is how they're thinking about it. So that is coming from the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Germany is telling the United States, we will send our Leopards, but you have to send your Abrams tanks. If you send your Abrams tanks, then we'll send our Leopards. And the Wall Street Journal title says, Berlin won't allow exports of German tanks to Ukraine unless the U.S. sends its own. Yeah, right. Germany. Olaf Scholz. Olaf Scholz. You're such a funny guy, as they said in Goodfellas. You're a funny guy. Yeah, you know that this defense minister's meeting in Germany, they're going to sit down, the German government, and they're going to say, the United States is going to say, send your tanks over to Ukraine and stop with this nonsense. You're telling us, you're going to tell us, the U.S., that you're not going to send your Leopards unless we send our Abrams, Olaf? Get out of here. That's what they're going to tell him. Get out of here. Oh. Let's walk through here. Let's see where this takes us. It's actually an actual street. Cool. So yeah, Germany's being cute. Yeah, U.S., we're not going to send our Leopards unless you send your Abrams. The U.S. is going to tell Olaf Scholz to just sit down, little boy. Sit down and send your Leopards. Allegedly, the Wall Street Journal is also saying that Germany, they actually told the U.S. that they're going to tell other EU partners not to send their Leopards either unless the U.S. sends its Abrams. Yeah, that's going to change come this Friday. Germany's going to send its tanks. No doubt about that. The German defense minister, by the way, this is an interesting statement. He was speaking to the media, and the German defense minister, he actually admitted, Mr. Pistorius, Boris Pistorius, he admitted that Germany is involved in the conflict in Ukraine, though indirectly. Those are the words he used. Germany is involved in Ukraine, but indirectly. Keep in mind what Lavrov said in my opening video segment. Lavrov is warning the Germans. The Russians are not going to take too kindly to statements like this, that they are indirectly, because he's saying indirectly now, but it doesn't take much to drop that IN from indirectly. It's not going to take much. And the Russians are not going to take too kindly to German Leopards fighting the Russian military. Lavrov is warning. He is warning Germany. He's warning Europe. Canada is going to be transferring 200 Senator armored vehicles to Ukraine. The assistance is estimated at more than $90 million and is allocated as part of an additional $500 million in military assistance to Ukraine announced by Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, in November 2022. So Canada is also going to be sending weapons to Ukraine. Everyone is going to now be sending weapons to Ukraine as the Zelensky military crumbles in the Donbass, because that's their solution to everything. The Netherlands is now also thinking about sending a Patriot air defense system to Ukraine as well. And we have some stories of some revelations of Bulgaria and the United States via Israel secretly sending weapons to Ukraine. So we have this story, which is gaining a lot of traction from the New York Times. According to the New York Times, the U.S. military was supplying Ukraine, and still is supplying Ukraine, from what I understand, with hundreds and thousands of artillery rounds pulled from stockpiles based in Israel. The Pentagon is reportedly scrambling to find munitions as Ukrainian forces continue to exhaust their arsenal. But I thought Russia was running out of weapons and missiles. Isn't that what they've been telling us? So now you have the US going into stockpiles in Israel and sending those to Ukraine. So can you say that Russia is demilitarizing Israeli stockpiles? From what I understand from this New York Times article, they present it as Israel not on board with this. I don't know. This is how the New York Times was presenting this. Like this was, hey, wait a minute. You're going into your stockpiles here that we have in Israel, and you're sending these to Ukraine because Israel's taken a position where they don't want to get involved. That's been their official position. We don't want none of this. And now it seems like they're being pulled in with this New York Times article. That may be the purpose of this New York Times article. Keep in mind that the U.S. wants to pull Israel into this conflict. So they run an article from the New York Times, which effectively pulls what was a neutral Israel into the conflict now by saying, you know what? We've been delivering weapons from you guys all this time. Let's walk this way. You guys have already seen this area in back of me. Let's walk through here. We'll walk through here and through the bus stop over there. So that may be the reason why Russia made all those deals with Iran. Maybe one of the reasons was Russia kind of sending a message to Israel saying, look, we know what the U.S. is doing. You guys can see this. We need to put an end to this. Meanwhile, you have the New York Times running a story and saying, well, we need to pull Israel into this conflict. We need to get Israel on board so that they can start providing their weapons and their Iron Dome and all of these things to Ukraine. So what better way than to run a story which says that, you guys are already involved, whether you know it or not. We've already been sending our weapons stored in Israel to Ukraine. So there you have it. We also have Bulgaria. Bulgaria was also supplying ammo to Ukraine, secretly supplied Ukraine with ammunition last spring, providing up to a third of its needs of its armed forces, is according to an investigation from Die Welt. And Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, he said this. He said, we knew that the Bulgarian warehouses had a large amount of the ammunition we needed. So the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, sent me to get the necessary materials with the help of diplomatic dexterity. That is what Kuleba said, which is just ridiculous. Kuleba makes it seem like this was some brilliant strategic move on the part of Zelensky and the Zelensky regime, Yeah, so we were planning everything, and we said, Bulgaria's got a lot of ammo. Let's engage in diplomatic dialogue with Bulgaria and figure out a way to get this ammo to Ukraine. This is nonsense. It's just a nonsense statement from Kuleba. Kuleba was ordered by NATO. Zelensky was told by NATO. Bulgaria was ordered by NATO. And they said, look, you have all this ammo in Bulgaria. NATO, you are going to give this ammo to Ukraine. And Kuleba went to Bulgaria to sign off on whatever they needed to sign off to get the ammo to Ukraine. This wasn't some brilliant strategy or some brilliant military planning from Zelensky and the foreign minister of Ukraine. They were ordered by NATO to do all of these things, and they did it. Plain and simple. Keep in mind Lavrov's warnings. Keep in mind Lavrov's warnings. We had Mark Ruta, I was talking about Netherlands, sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Mark Ruta, he was in the United States, and he was speaking to the Atlantic Council to a show that they have called Front Pages by the Atlantic Council. I'm sure that's a great show that all of you are watching on a daily basis. I know I watch the Atlantic Council's Front Pages every day. But Ruta was giving an interview there. And he said this. He said, Belarus more and more is a vassal of Russia. It's very difficult to look at them as a separate state. They are very much under Russian control. That's what he said. This is Mark Ruta. Mark Ruta is saying this, that Belarus is a vassal. Mark Ruta. Anyway, and then he said in the same interview, if Russia would be able to get a grip, a Finlandization of large parts of Europe, that would immediately impact to collective security and safety of the United States. Mark Ruta is very concerned about the safety of the United States. So in one statement, he's saying that Belarus is a vassal to Russia. And then immediately in the next statement, almost immediately in the next statement, he's saying, you know, if Russia wins in Ukraine, then it's going to be bad, not for the Netherlands, not for Europe. Who cares about that? It's going to be bad for the United States. So, you know, I'm just here to tell everybody that. But it's Belarus that's the vassal, not me, Ruta. Remember when Ruta was getting all of those awards from Klaus Schwab back in like 2017, 18 as like the WEF Man of the Year, Puppet of the Year. Anyway, let's do some clown worlds here. I've got 3 clown worlds. The first clown world is all the news that is breaking out, coming from the WEF, that escorts are making big money in Davos at the moment. Big money. They're charging like around $2,500 for their services. Female escorts, male escorts, you name it. They're there in Davos in full force. They're fully booked up solid to provide their services to these extraterrestrials, as Kerry put it, to a bunch of extraterrestrials who are saving the planet. The courageous heroes who jump on their private planes to save the planet. You know, they need some love too. So they're paying $2,500 a pop for escorts. That story is all over the place now. We have Arestowicz, the recently resigned Baghdad Bob, Zelensky's best buddy, his theater buddy, who at one point in time also would dress up in drag. He resigned because he told the truth about the apartment buildings. And because he told the truth about the apartment buildings, he has landed himself on the Miro Dvorets kill list, the enemies of the state. Now, I'm not 100% sure of this. I haven't really had time to go to their hosted website, this Ukraine kill list website, nor do I want to, and search for Arestowicz. So I've got screenshots which show Arestowicz. And interestingly enough, one of the pictures shows Arestowicz dressed as a woman with like a blonde wig, which I thought was interesting, but I don't know if this is 100% real. So just keep that in mind. But if it is real, well then, you know, it just goes to show that the powers that be are very upset with the fact that Arestowicz ruined their narrative, because they use these narratives that the Russians did it. They use these narratives in order to pump Ukraine up with more weapons and money. And so Arestowicz, well, he spoke out of line there, and he's now been put on the kill list. We also have the clown world coming from the UK, from the world of football, where we had sex noises interrupting Gary Lineker while he presented coverage of the BBC Wolves clash with Liverpool. And this was some sort of prank call or something like that, as Lineker was speaking, was giving his analysis on this game. We had these noises in the background by like a professional prankster or provocateur or something like that. Oh boy, you can find it on Twitter, the videotape. It's pretty funny. And finally, let's do one final clown world and we'll wrap it up. And it has to do with Greta Thunberg and her recent arrest in Germany. There's a lot of video now floating out there saying that the arrest was staged. And you can see like video right before Thunberg was being dragged off. You can see video of Thunberg hanging out with police, and they were taking photos, and she was smiling with the police, and they were preparing to drag her off. And you can see the cameraman panning and taking the video of the police, you know, moving with Thunberg. And the narrative is that this was all staged. Well, the German police, they actually put out a statement to the BBC. Funny how the BBC is involved in all of these things, isn't it? They put out a statement to the BBC, and they said, no, this was not staged at all. This was a real arrest. And we were just, you know, preparing Greta for the eventual arrest, picking her up and dragging her to the police van or police car. That's what we were doing. But this was a real arrest. This wasn't staged at all. That's what the German police said. It's a nice arrest. Those German police are really nice. Right before they arrest you, they decide to let you take photos and joke and smile and get your cameraman to film you. Some pretty nice police out there in Germany. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rockfin. Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code Good Day and look for my channel, Alexander's channel, the Duran's channel on all the video platforms from Telegram to Rumble to BitChute, ODYSEE, and that's it. Take care.